Hello, hello, everyone, from a very snowy Connecticut, which is where I am located. And of course, I said to Michelle when we, excuse me, were communicating back and forth about my travel challenges. I feel like such a wimp that I am complaining about bad weather when I'm talking to the wonderful people from Minnesota who live and breathe this kind of weather every single day. But for those of us in Connecticut, needless to say, 6 to 12 inches puts us completely, no pun intended, under the weather. So again, I do apologize for not being able to be with you all, but so excited that through the wonders of technology, we can still be together. For those of you, as I've launched right in, who have no idea who the heck is speaking to you and who is on this web call, my name is Janice Crampton, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Executive Director and CEO of the Association of Independent School Admission Professionals. And during our time today, you'll hear a little bit more about our association and the work that we do in support of admission and enrollment management professionals around the world. But again, our time together today is not, in fact, about me, and it's not about ASAP. It's about you. And for that, again, I so appreciate and value the opportunity to work with the Minnesota Independent School Forum. A couple of housekeeping details that, again, we just want to kind of get through. We are recording this presentation today, and I certainly have the wonderful colleagues at MISF on the other end here that will either type in questions to me, but most likely will pose questions to me. But as much as we can possibly make this as interactive as we can, I really would appreciate that. So I have said to everyone out in Minneapolis, please, please, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask some questions because I will be asking some questions of you all. And so again, whether it's the wandering laptop or whatnot, to try to hear your voice, we'll seek to do that. So perhaps if someone could just give me an indication for those of you who are perhaps at your desk on a webinar call today, as well as at the main location, if you can give me some indication that you can hear me and see me, then I'll launch right into this because we'd hate to think that I go on and on and on, and meanwhile you can't hear any of it. So thank you to Angela, who has said all good. So all we need is one to say we're all good, and the rest is history. We can take it from there. So again, as I mentioned, my name is Janice Crampton, and I, in fact, found myself not too long ago in the seat that many of you are sitting in. Excuse me. I was a director of admission at a pre-K through 12th grade school, have also worked in pre-K through 8th grade schools, and so on and so on. And I guess this whole concept of the birth of a culture of ownership is really, really, really something important to me because it speaks to what I think on a good day our schools and institutions talk about, that we're all in this together and that enrollment is everyone's job and, teamwork has its rewards. But it's not uncommon for some of those darker days or the more challenging days where, your colleagues or your parents or your board or your head may very well turn to you and say, so, what are you doing? What are you up to? How's it going? And it can be very isolating. And so in this whole idea of getting this conversation going, I want us to just spend a little bit of time asking you to think about the right frame of mind. Again, as we are literally and figuratively spread out through the country, I'm calling in from Connecticut. You all are, again, either breaking bread under one roof or you're sitting at your desk calling in. What brought you here today? What do you hope to, in fact, gain at the end of this? What do you, hope to hear, or for that matter, seek to contribute to this call? And really the opportunity as well to think about, why does all of this discussion matter? Why does all of this discussion matter? Those are some really key points that I ask that you, again, just think about as we engage ourselves in the discussion today. Because again, your mindset is absolutely critical to our success. And, again, as I have oftentimes said to my own children, that phrase of attitude impacts altitude. That whole understanding of the words and phrases we use, not only about ourselves as professionals, but about our work, impacts how things will very well either happen or not happen. And so I show this to you because as we look at our ASAP database, we have close to 37 different ways that people refer to themselves. Admissions, enrollment manager, or I'm dean of enrollment management. I'm a director, a coordinator, a facilitator, a liaison. The most recent name tag that I saw at the NAIS meeting in Atlanta was that a director of admission has changed her title, and she is now the Chief Experience Officer. The Chief Experience Officer. And for as much as I wanted to tip my hat to her and say, way to go, creative one, I thought to myself, how does that title impact and influence her mindset about the work that she does? And what does that say to her outside audience as it relates to how they will either know or not know who to turn to on a particular issue or title? So again, I don't necessarily have an answer for whether that's the right or the wrong thing to be called, but what you are called and what you are referred to in some ways matters, and in some ways it doesn't matter, because it really is about your mindset. And as we also think about these days that we're in, the need for us to truly understand and listen to the whispers that are either outside our power and control or inside our power and control is to know that you need to love what you do. And again, there are many, many, many days that I don't like what I do, but I always love what I do. And I think, again, this is a profession that is not for the faint of heart. And if any of you disagree with that and you feel as though if you don't love what you do, you can still do it, I would welcome the opportunity to hear about how you do it, because I certainly know that I couldn't do it that way. And as someone that spends a lot of time interacting and interfacing with this profession around the world, I hearken back to, again, to mindset. I've shared this story with many people, and perhaps some of you in the audience today have heard me tell this story, but here I go again. It was a day in 1988 where I found myself at a faculty meeting. And it was at that faculty meeting where the head of school was standing before us and talking about the annual giving campaign. And when spring comes around and though it gets warmer out, we're going to have a dress code issue, to think of the auction and the gala, to remind ourselves of, the importance of advisor notes. It was our usual faculty meeting. And as our head of school finished her part of the conversation and called that meeting to a close, she asked that very important question: are there any other items that anyone wants to bring up? And it was at that moment that this gentleman in the back, right, the old backroom Balmer, came up and said, I have a question. When are we going to get our contracts for employment next year? When are we going to know if we get a raise? When are we going to know if we're going to potentially have one class to teach or 5? When will we know the quality of the kids that we're going to be teaching? And instead of responding to that question, she turned to me who, oh, by the way, was 26, responsible for the largest line item in the school's operating budget, and had training, but that training was more by, energy and osmosis from learning from others. There was not an ASAP at that time to teach us the rules of engagement or the roadmap to success. And she asked me to come forward and answer that question. And it was at that moment, quite honestly, friends and colleagues, that I said, we're not in Kansas anymore. Because it was at that moment that I realized that for as much as I think about we're all in this together, and it takes a village to raise a child, and that at every corner, at every moment, it's a teachable moment, that I was really going this alone. And again, I say this because it really does, as I said, impact our mindset and our thinking. Because for many of us, this line in the sand that we've created, sort of everything before 2008 or after 2008 is the line in the sand, it's not any easier to recruit or retain our students. Our resources are limited. Our staff budgets are more limited as well. There's increasing expectations on the work that we do, and everyone is looking for the silver bullet. Everyone is looking for what's the answer. And unfortunately, how we are reacting is rather than being planful and strategic and sort of following that map, we are in fact finding ourselves, rather than ready, aim, fire, we're fire, aim, ready. That we're trying new initiatives, that we're adding on new strategies, that we're not getting rid of anything that we've done before because, oh my gosh, that's the way we've always done it. And yet behind the scenes, we're always asking this question, how can we possibly sustain this? How can we possibly sustain this pace? Some call it chaos, or some follow this mindset of, again, a lack of control or what you can control. I think it's important as we once again continue to turn our attention towards this mindset of a culture of ownership that we think about and understand what is in fact out of our control that can make a difference and what is in our control that can make a difference. What is clearly out of our control that makes a huge difference are in fact the economics of the world that we live in. As I put here, do we need explanation? I would say that the devil in the details might need explanation, but we all know the economy, the economy, the economy. The demographics are also out of our control, unless, of course, we decide that we're going to contribute to the demographics by having more children. But the reality is the demographics are what they are. And what they are, my friends, is that no matter where you live, there's a plus and minus to this, but overall, there is a decline in school-age children, especially in the lower grades. And so if we think not only about next year, and 3 years and 5 years, knowing, of course, out of our control are the demographics. Out of our control is the fact that we know that there are fewer lower school students. Then what are we thinking about and how are we planning for 10 years out when those lower school children grow up? Many of us, in fact, probably aren't spending that time because we're living in the immediate. The other thing that's completely out of our control that we might have some sphere of influence on, however, are in fact values and thinking and beliefs in education in relationship to disposable income. There was a recent study done, and again, I saw this information from NBOA as well as NAIS, and I'm sure I've seen it in other corners. But what's interesting about this survey is it asks people who are of a particular income level that oftentimes is attributed to or likened to those families that in fact are our constituent group. And the questions that they were asked them to identify if you had a lessening of your disposable income, what would you give up? Believe it or not, the study showed that they were more willing to give up the educational experiences of their children than they were their country clubs, their cars, their vacations, and summer camps. And so again, trying not to provide my own little commentary to that thinking, if that is the thinking, then what is our ability to control or change that thinking? And doesn't that put more emphasis on how we must demonstrate our value added far more than just saying, the greatest gift you can give your child is a lower school or middle school or upper school education. Because quite honestly, my friends, as we know, oftentimes our number one competitors aren't necessarily those colleagues to the left and to the right of you. They're the public schools, that free choice. So if in fact we don't have the ability to look at economics and demographics and values, then the next thing that we also find that is out of our control is what I call Mother Nature. And that is that concept of the big fish eating the little fish as the big fish needs to change. Again, what are you saying, Janice? What I'm saying is how many of you, and this is where it's so hard in the absence of being right in front of you and seeing body language and engaging in conversation, but for those who have been in this particular profession, whether it's at your present school or at another school, how many of you have seen a shift in certain schools, not only applicant group, but the kinds of students that they are now enrolling or accepting and then enrolling? That idea and notion of when things become more limited, things become narrower, things become less robust, some schools that would have never admitted a particular profile of student are now finding that they are admitting that profile of student. So what does that domino effect do to the other school that would have admitted that profile of student that was in their wheelhouse and now is being admitted to a school that either perceived or real is either more competitive, more accessible, has more resources through financial aid, and so on and so on. So again, how does that impact you, and how does it absolutely demonstrate the need for what we call a much more dynamic brand? You have to be responsive and nimble, and you can't go back on what you perceive to be the real and important message of your school, but what is in fact out there and what people are imagining as they are standing on the soccer sidelines or again in and amongst a community. So again, as we think about the things that we have no control and we think about our sphere and influence, do we understand and have we in fact responded both proactively to the things that we know are in our control? And that really, again, is what we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about today. So we're going to do it in a wide variety of different ways, and even more variety given the fact that I'm now sitting here in Connecticut and you all are in Minnesota. We're going to talk a little bit about the reality check of where the profession is, and then we're going to look at it once again in the right frame of mind. And we're going to examine why having a culture of ownership will definitely create a more competitive advantage for your school. We're going to look a little bit at the definition of culture and the difference between culture and climate. And then we're going to look and demonstrate ways that you can understand your school's core values and shift your thinking from it's not my job to how can I help? And as I said before, what I really hope we can do, and it will be challenging, but I think we can do it, is see if we can in fact have opportunities where we open up the mic and we have you all contribute to the conversation. So, context matters. At our association, our learning and development framework is really the basis for all that we do. And as we look to this learning and development framework, it helps us and allows us to think about anything that we are teaching, espousing, or urging you to either implement or even reflect on. It's connected back to the reason of why does it matter. So as we look at the reality check, we understand the reason why we need to in fact embark upon sort of that frame of reference, because the reality again of the situation is that back in 2008, there's this perception that we were all just gatekeepers. And again, the idea and notion that students were just running to our doors and families were enrolling left and right is, in my opinion, the urban myth. Because right now everyone talks about, I wear many hats, I have so many responsibilities. Well, in fact, we had all of those same responsibilities and we had many of those hats that we wore, but we managed them differently, right? And we also worked more collectively with clarity about who we were as institutions and who we were as academic and social emotional entities for students. And when, in fact, you find that enrollment becomes a challenge for you, this is where mission creep comes into play. And again, what does that have to do with us? Well, it then means that we have to be far more of a judge, a juror, a fireman, and a policeman all at the same time. But as times are changing, the question then becomes, are we as a profession changing and are schools changing? And this is really, again, where our association was and why it was created, to educate, elevate, and empower you. To once again say that the various institutional needs that you have, the one person, one office, or one aspect of the largest line item in the school's operating budget was in fact housed under one roof. That there was a lack of understanding as to the skill sets and qualities necessary for the job. And again, that idea and notion of that this was an accidental profession played very much into setting the stage for why we are doing what we're doing today and why, again, it matters. So knowing how to do the things that need to be done, as well as knowing who should be doing the do, helps, again, for us to talk about and espouse the delegation and responsibility and the authority to influence and impact your end result. Again, all of this is leading towards the do cannot be confused with the how you do it, or, in fact, who's involved in creating what the job responsibility is. So as earlier in my time with you today, I talked about getting your head in the right space. Why are you here? Our learning and development framework, and by the way, there's no quiz on any of this information. So the good news is just let it wash over you and provide perspective for our conversation as we move forward. But our learning and development framework looks at, as you see here, where you are in your school's mission, your geography, the kind of school you are, and so on and so on. And then it acknowledges that as an admission and enrollment management professional, there are professional competencies that either need to be inherent in who you are or nurtured and fostered. And those come in the area of these 13 items that you see before you. Action-oriented, collaborates, it goes on, with, again, one of the attributes being competencies focused on managing conflict. These came from the Korn Ferry Leadership Framework. And so it wasn't something that we at ASAP sat around and just targeted. There was a very strategic and thoughtful educational process in how we identified what the skill sets were. So as we think about the culture of ownership, which again, it's a teaser to you, we're going to get to that. Can you imagine the ability for you as a professional to understand how to balance stakeholders, how to manage conflict, how to think about interpersonal savvy, how to distill and instill trust? Absolutely, because that's the art and the science of how you relate to people, so that your job is not transactional in nature, right? Have I got a school for you? Can I sell you a school? Hey, I think you should come to this school because it becomes more about relationship building. It becomes more about, here's our mission, here's what we offer, this is what our brand and values are, this is what we feel we do better than others, therefore we hope that you will join us. And it also allows you to turn to the other people at your institution and manage and work with them in these particular areas through these particular skill sets. The next area with regard to the learning and development framework is to look at performance behaviors. These are also known as ASAP's, or formally known as ASAP standards and competencies. So again, ethical behavior and best practices, your ability to understand the financial as well as the data-driven dreaming aspects of our work, to look once again at this opportunity to communicate effectively, to look at the opportunity and importance of developing best practices at your school. And again, the big L of leadership as it revolves around evolving your social and emotional intelligence. And so again, as we move towards this idea, and because I'm showing this to you, I completely understand and imagine that you probably can't see this, but because we are recording this and you'll get a copy of this, you'll see that we then have further drilled down on exactly what the behaviors mean. And furthermore, where do these nuances of competencies and behaviors fall into you as a professional who developmentally might be new to the profession, and we call that emerging, or someone who is advancing, perhaps mid-level, and someone who is a senior admission professional, potentially being referred to as mastery. And finally, for your reference at another time, we then know that we educate, elevate, and empower, and we have compartmentalized all that we do in these particular areas. So this is, believe it or not, the portion and the section of our work that sets and lays the groundwork for the next sort of item of discussion and the moving forward. Again, if I was standing in front of you, I'd have the opportunity to just look out into the audience and say, how we doing? But in the absence of that, I want to just see if there are any questions. I know that Valerie is asking about handouts and words to review, and you don't see any of those things. The handouts will be available to you and will be part of the webinar coverage. But I'm hoping that my colleagues at the Minnesota Independent School Forum can help me with this one. Valerie is saying that she's only seen my face, which I hope is not the case because I've been showing slides. Corey, would you be able to help me with that?
Well, since you're the presenter, it would be on your end to present your PowerPoint. Otherwise, if you could email it to me. I'm not sure how else to do it.
So have you all just been listening to me and not seeing the slides?
Yep, yes. But we're seeing them now.
Do you see my face going, oh, the horror? Oh, I wish I had known this. Okay, so my sincere apologies. You guys are all so nice. No one said anything. Okay, so let me just very quickly do this. Trust me, we are not going all the way back to the beginning, but I am going to very quickly. You now have the slides, and you'll see. Isn't it pretty and colorful?
It's nice.
I'm so bummed. I can't even begin to tell you. So we're going to, again, thank heavens I didn't go for another hour and a half with you just seeing my face. You guys would have gotten the hook. So again, we put ourselves in the right frame of mind. We've talked about the power of words. We've talked about the importance of love. I waxed on philosophically about that day in March. I talked about resources are limited, and then the importance of not being ready, aim, fire. Well, in fact, being ready, aim, fire, but we're all fire, ready, aim. And then we talked about the things we can control and the ones that we can't control. I gave you an overview of, if I do say so myself, a very nice visual. I'm trying to provide a little levity through my anxiety here. But the 4 steps of our time together today, looking at the importance of context. And then we talked about, again, this wonderful learning and development framework, which I kept saying, I hope you can see it, or I'm sure you can't see it now. And thank you again to Valerie for saying, I don't see anything but your face. So thank you. Are there any questions, thoughts, reactions before we move on to the next stage of again, our conversation? And by the way, I'm totally fine with you leaving the microphone open so I can hear you, because it's very lonely here in Connecticut. Thoughts, reactions, comments?
Anybody?
Have any of you found any of what I shared with you through face only? Once again, I'll have to let that go. But have any of you experienced any of the things that I've talked about, or is all of this completely new and novel to those of you in Minnesota? None of this ever happened. Okay, So I will take that as everything that I've shared. None of it ever happens to you all in Minnesota. And I'm going to encourage everyone to move to Minnesota, because I will tell you, in all of the other states around the country, the idea and notion of again, feeling somewhat isolated, and having the need for us to once again think about how we can pull various individuals at our institutions together is very much top of mind. So as we transition now, can you just confirm for me that you can see the screen?
We can.
Okay. So let's hope that this next section resonates a little bit more now that you can see it. Okay. So one of the things that we know for sure is obviously our events and our reaction to those events really do indicate and determine our outcome. And again, as I hearken back to pre-2008, there were certain events that happened, right? Inquiries, applications, enrollment, assessment, and we reacted to those things in certain ways, and that obviously indicated our outcome. But if your reaction is different, then you're going to have a different outcome. So I want you all to think for a moment about the following kind of two key questions. When you think about meeting your goal, and in this instance, meeting your goal is your enrollment goal, are you thinking about just new students, returning students, both new and returning, the dollars that are represented by X, meaning the number of students enrolled? Tell me a little bit, can we have some shout outs? What are you guys thinking about when you think about meeting your enrollment goal?
C.
D. You're thinking about D. Okay. Anybody else?
C.
E.
Right. Okay. Now another question. When you think about meeting your goal, are you thinking about this by achieving this all by yourself? Are you thinking about this through oversight and implementation of your plan? Are you also thinking about this from the idea and notion of prayer and fingers crossed? A little levity here. Are you doing this by yourself? Are you following a plan? What is it?
A.
You're doing it all by yourself. Okay. How about the rest of the group? Are you feeling like you're doing this pretty much by yourself?
I feel like we used to do A, and now we've sort of been forced into making a plan, and it's helped us to sort of have something to work with.
Yep, yep. And when you say you were forced into it, what forced you to do that?
We work with an organization that wanted to encourage us to have a plan because they knew it was a better way to do it. So working with them was the force. It wasn't a bad thing. It was,
Okay. Yeah. And how are people receiving? Let me word it another way. Are they receptive to this type of implementation and strategy and planning, or do they feel like it's an obligation?
I think overall it's good.
Okay. Okay. Well, quite honestly, the answer needs to be for both counts is that we need to look at achieving our enrollment goal by looking at new and returning students, and then the dollars represented. Furthermore, we really do need to think about enrollment management from this standpoint of looking at it through oversight and implementation. I think, again, doing it all by yourself is frequent, and although frustrating, again, one of the reasons why we hope that you come to meetings such as this, now that you can see the slides, that you can go back and feel empowered with some strategies here. So ask yourself, when you think about the families at your school, are they experiencing the same quality of care in the classroom, in a parent-teacher conference, in their communication between home and school as they did in their admission process? So the question really is are they, right? And if they are, how do you know that? How do you know whether or not the process of admission mirrors the same kind of experience? Anybody want to comment on that? Are people at your school able to say, I know families are experiencing the same quality of care? Are you able to answer that question? The reality is that many times we don't necessarily know what happens and what parent perceptions are the minute that we enroll them. We begin to sort of say, that's not my job, right? That's now the school's job. But if enrollment, and again, you'll see me refer to this later on, but if enrollment is A plus B, meaning new students plus returning students equals your overall enrollment, then I would hope that you would make the case for you needing to be involved in understanding, influence, and if not, direct relationship work in retention. So not knowing how your families are feeling, what they're experiencing once they get to your school is a missed moment and opportunity for you. The other thing that comes into play is this question of, it's that time of year, or, oh my gosh, it's that time of year. And what I mean by that is traditionally or historically, admission and enrollment management and those efforts have been very seasonal. If it's the summer, you know, we sat by the pool or at the beach, right? We were maybe enrolling a couple of new students, but there really was not a lot of activity. The fall was all about open houses. The winter was all about assessing students, and the spring was all about yield. And it's not uncommon for us to have people say, if one more faculty member asks me, what am I going to do for the rest of the year now that the spring is here, I'm going to scream. Because the reality is to the left-hand side of the screen that hopefully you are now seeing, you're going to know that it's happening all the time, that the nuances and the process is in fact continuous. And if in fact it is continuous, are your offices set up to support that? Is someone answering the phone at your main desk if in the dog days of June, July, and August, none of the school teachers and students are there, but you're open? Does everybody get voicemail? How about, I always loved this one, when major construction would happen in the summer, and you understand why, but you couldn't even give a tour to a prospective family without tripping over some, tarp or paint, can or some, part of your school campus that's being torn up. Is there thought and consideration to the fact that it is continuous? Think about as well the amount of time that we spend with inquiries and applicants and assessing them and then enrolling them during certain times of year, only to find that if someone were to apply to you in July or August, or for that matter, 2 days before school started, you can race through and enroll them. What does that say about our process if it takes so gosh darn long earlier, but now we can speed it up? The other part of this is that we know in the United States, and this is a national statistic, that families report an 18-month purchasing or decision-making cycle. So as you now see, the awareness, the consideration, the purchase, the retention, the advocacy, that purchasing cycle for families, if it typically is an 18-month process, we report annually. We're not reporting data based on a family's journey. We're reporting it based on a calendar. So many of us find that when we say to our board or our head or our team, this is where we are on inquiries or apps or so on and so on, and you talk about, well, how many of the inquiries that you have this year were for future years? We oftentimes hear schools say, well, I don't track those yet. Well, does that mean you never touch them or market to them or interview them or tour them? So we need to, again, change our mindset and our data that supports it. Furthermore, as we think about the purchasing process, and for the woman who was sharing with us the fact that now they're looking at a more strategic or thoughtful plan, to look at what are the actions and activities that you embark upon that speak to the purchasing process in business. So, a family discovers they have a problem, right? They discover their present school system is not meeting their child's needs, whatever the case might be. A problem has been identified. That's called need recognition. We need something, and we hope someone can solve that for us. Then they embark upon an information search. What or who will solve it? Well, where do they go? They go to ads, they go to online, they go to Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, whatever it might be, through social media. They turn to a friend, they turn to a colleague. Are we empowering all of those sources of information with not only the right information, but the kind of information that you want people to be armed with? In a culture of ownership, you have identified what those sources are, and you've identified who could be key people or key levers to then feed information to. As you evaluate the alternatives, people go to comparisons and value add. They move to purchasing decision. The reality is that when all things are equal, and there's an algebraic formula for this, I don't have it in my slide deck. I should probably add it, should have added it. But when people go to purchase, people turn to price as the determining factor. Now, if I have worked really hard on need recognition, information search, evaluation on alternatives, but I haven't done a good enough job in establishing my brand and value proposition, I don't want to lose a very, very, very mission appropriate student and family because the dollars are not meeting their needs. So the purchase decision has to include tuition assistance. And tuition assistance would be your conversations with your CFO about payment plans, about financial aid, about, all these other options and opportunities. And then, of course, the minute that someone purchases something, they're evaluating whether or not they made the right choice. And we know, because we've all purchased high ticket items, you don't want to necessarily have your families have buyer's remorse. And yet, as we think about the things that we can control and the things that we can't control, there are confusing strategies and factors. So we have, in many of our mission statements, personal attention, right? We foster a feeling of family. We're a community. And yet we send out form letters. How many of you find that you say, "Dear parent"? I'm hearing whispering. Does someone have a question?
Janice, are you seeing questions from Laura Hartog in St. John's Prep?
I am now seeing Laura Hartog from St. John's Prep. She can see the screen. How do I unmute if I'm on a phone call? Now, are you able to control are you the Julie McCoy of this Love Boat? Are you able to get on here and unmute people, or is that also something I need to do here?
You would have to do that, and they would have to also make sure that their speaker is unmuted too, as well.
Okay. Well, this is just super. I am going to get the gold star for presenting, webinar, polls, handouts. Okay, so hold on one second, guys, because I want to be able to, in the attendees, I'm going to ask Laura. I'm going to unmute Laura. Okay, Laura, did you have a question? I feel like I'm Frasier on that television show. Does the caller have a question?
I do not right now, but I wasn't able to unmute my phone. So now I can mute myself and unmute myself.
There you go. Okay, here you go. Super. Sorry about that, Laura, and now she's muted. So I hope the tuna roll-ups are good, because clearly the presentation is challenged. There's no doubt about that. So again, sorry. Can you see the screen, everybody?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so onward we go. How we view our data, again, gets back to how we're presenting ourselves and the work that we do. And what I'm sharing here is sort of two different sides of the equation. We have perception and we have reality. And we also have the fact that oftentimes in our data analysis and in the work that we're doing towards establishing what we offer to boards and faculty and others with regard to data, is that you want to certainly tell them what the overarching themes are, but we tend not to dig down deep into all of the other minor details that can sometimes become big details as a way to mirror our success and look towards forecasting. So again, as we think about how people feel is how they respond, the other part of this interesting equation that we're talking about is, in fact, this idea and notion if with all these things that are part of our control, we still have, and this is a link that, again, you'll see here, but also you'll get a copy of it and you can review it and read it at another time. But this gentleman at the University of Chicago said, with all these things that we try to do in independent school worlds, the reality is that even though people are hearing that unemployment is stronger, or that employment is stronger, and they hear that in fact families should in fact have more disposable income, they don't feel that way, and therefore they're not going to respond that way. So when you then layer on the idea and notion of your team and its work, because again, we know what the family's feeling, we know about their purchasing process, we know in fact how they might respond, but now you're looking at how your team functions. How many of you are finding that you, as the person who's, remember, that chief experience officer and working closely with prospective families and present families, are not part of decisions that are being made that impact a family's decision or whether or not it would work well? Oftentimes we hear we're dropping a particular course because we've just hired a new faculty member who has a particular talent or skill set, only to find that no one's asking for Mandarin Chinese. All they want is Spanish, so you have a problem. Or how about you've sent out all your letters and your financial aid decisions only to find that the technology director has made a really strong case for the purposes of having everything on iPads, and yet how do you make sure that everybody can afford those things? Are you working in isolation? Are you, in fact, working at a team? People oftentimes talk about shared understanding and unified vision, and yet they oftentimes still continue to talk about things in isolation. So as faculty, we talk about parent-teacher conferences as a demonstration of home and school. We talk about if a child misbehaves, it's all our responsibility. We talk about curriculum mapping. We talk about dress code, sort of this kumbaya moment of we're all in it together. But then when we get to enrollment and admission, it makes absolutely no sense, because then all of a sudden everyone's like, well, that's not my job. That's your job. Or I'm not in charge of this. This is what you do. I was hired just to teach, and now you want me to market the school? It cannot be. It just cannot be. And so in creating a culture of ownership, I found this quote, and I love it. People do not do anything until they are inspired, which is perhaps why Martin Luther King did not stand on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and say, I have a strategic plan. You all need to inspire people. You all need to be inspired as well. You all need to return to the mission of your institutions. Remind yourself of why not only you first fell in love with your job, but you first fell in love with your job in the context of your mission. And seek to marry those things together in a way that moves people through the purchasing process, but also own it, but don't feel like you have to do it all. By creating a culture of ownership, you move from people to be compliant, yeah, I'll do it, to being more committed. From being passive to being participative. From being just observing and watching to owning it and feeling a level of responsibility for the success of this process. And certainly the level of exhaustion, hopefully, can be diminished. What is culture? Culture is the tapestry of your shared visions and benefits. It's what communicates your priority, and it shapes your thoughts and actions. Who shapes culture is anyone in a community that is willing to engage in that thoughtful reflection and purposeful action. So in essence, it's all of your disciples, right? It's the Pied Piper. It's all the people who are willing to follow you and join you arm in arm. Who shapes culture? It's continual, and it's being affirmed, and it's being altered. So there are moments and times where we need to understand, and I just, again, had someone who said amen on this call. Someone just said amen. Laura Hartog, love it. And so again, it's continual, it's altered, it's affirmed. Furthermore, your actions, how you behave as a professional, how you turn to your faculty, your staff, your parents, the rest of your group. That action shapes your culture. And in turn, that'll also then shape your action. You see, it's a cycle. One thing feeds into the other. And finally, your leaders must be on the dance floor and in the balcony. I loved that phrase because it's once again instilling you can't be, no matter what your title is, you can't be up in the balcony asking everyone else to do it. You've got to be in there. You have to be just as much as they are involved in these actions and activities. Finally, and here, let's see if I can change this. I apologize. I'll make it for when you get the slide deck as a PDF, I'll move this up. But when we think about culture versus climate, because how many of us have talked about the climate at my school is, the climate at my school is. It's different than culture because climate is an immediate perception that you have of a place, right? A family comes to your school and they get a gut feeling, right? It's that immediate response. But culture is communicated through your stories and your myths. It's your history. It's your symbols, your logos, your mottos. It's the rituals. You know, why do you have morning meeting? Or why do you have a 100-day celebration? Or why do you interview every single family? Or, you know, again, whatever it might be. Let me ask you this question. Can any of you provide me with examples of the difference at your schools between climate and culture? Or for that matter, let me ask it a different way. Do any of you want to share what you see as culture, and what are the important stories or symbols or rituals that you have? Anyone? Do any of you have weekly morning meetings for your students? How about, do any of you have, I used it as a reference, 100-day celebrations?
Got some yeses?
Okay. Then the question is why do you do those things? Why is it that that's tradition? What is it about those things that you do as rituals that are part of who you are, let's say at Holy Trinity, or, you know, at any other school?
Can I add something? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
This is Laura from St. John's Prep. So one thing that we do every Monday morning is we have a prep talk. So our entire upper school meets in our Weber Center auditorium, and we share things that are going on in our school. So athletics, academics, or other activities. And the reason why we do it is part of our Benedictine values is community. And so we do that as a way to build a sense of community and help students to find areas where they might fit into our community.
Right, right, perfect. And so do you talk about that in your admission process?
Yes, with every family and on every tour.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you feel as though that, for example, is a demonstration of your brand or value added?
It is, because community is one of those core things that is about being a student at the school.
Right, right. And so furthermore, what happens if, or let me ask it this way, who's in charge of those meetings?
Technically, we have our, it's whoever is in charge of the colloquiums, we call them. So right now it's under campus ministry, but everybody goes to them. So it's not just campus ministry being in charge.
Okay.
They organize.
But great. So if we were to take this now, and I hope you understand why I'm pushing a little bit, not in a bad way, but in a way to say to you, let's go back to the layers. So let's say if these particular meetings that are owned, right, operated, and yes, a lot of people contribute, but in fact, we find that all of a sudden they go off target or off mission, or they're not as successful, or they begin to decline. Would that impact you at all?
As an admission person?
Yeah.
Of course.
Right, right. And yet, are you involved in any of those discussions, or do you have feedback in efforts to maybe contribute to how it's being perceived or good or bad or indifferent? Not that you're, sitting there in a punitive way judging it, but do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, we always have feedback, but it's not always, there's not always a platform to share it. And we have no in the planning of that, unless we insert ourselves in there, which we tend to find ways as much as possible to find our way in there.
Yep. And so again, that's an example of maybe to put off to the side here when we start later on in our time together today, to imagine how you might be able to involve yourself in feedback or in strengthening that, not to say that it's broken, but you understand what I'm saying, so that then you have that as an example to demonstrate what we seek to be able to once again espouse today, and this idea and understanding of how it can't be that you're working alone on one thing and they're working alone on another. Okay. Angela, can I unmute you because you contributed to the conversation talking about your prayer over the intercom? So I'm going to unmute you, and if you don't want to, you can say, Janice, please mute me again. But Angela, you're now on the call with us. Okay, so Angela was contributing to our call, and she said that in fact that at her school, that each day is started with a prayer over the intercom for all of the students. And so I would imagine, again, those rituals become part of what you're talking about in the culture and the community of your school. So let's get back to, again, the difference between climate and culture, and then say, oh my gosh, wait, hold it. Is this part of a strategic enrollment management plan? And the answer is yes, believe it or not. Because if a strategic enrollment management plan, and I'm going to read a little bit here, is characterized as a comprehensive process designed to help an institution achieve and maintain optimal recruitment and retention and graduation rates, where optimum is defined as in the academic context of the school, a culture of ownership is the mindset that your institution must have as you think about the strategic enrollment management process for your school. And so as you think about strategic enrollment management, and someone said my sound is breaking up, so I hope it's a little bit clearer, and if it's not, if someone could chime in, I appreciate it. But strategic enrollment management looks to what are the actions and activities that influence towards student choice, that then transition a child to a school, that thinks about financial policies and procedures that impact admission and enrollment, that then once again thinks about influences towards the student attrition or retention, and finally thinks about student outcomes. You cannot do this alone. There's just no way you can do this alone. So all action and activity is based on the needs and experience of your customer, also known as your family, in the context of your mission. And when you in fact think about those principles, it will allow you to establish clear enrollment goals, talk about what student success looks like, determines and helps you achieve your optimum enrollment, generates tuition, and all these other things noted here. Questions, thoughts about this concept of climate, culture, and its play into strategic enrollment management? Someone typed in, change is hard in Minnesota. And I love that. Change is hard in Minnesota. Could you imagine this way of thinking working in your school community? Or are you imagining that that's just not how you all operate as a climate and a culture? I just would love to hear anyone who might want to respond to that in some way. Anyone? Okay, so we'll just continue on, all right? So as we examine a culture of ownership, the question then becomes, how can we do this? First of all, we need to make sure that we can develop a shared understanding in and amongst your school. And what I mean by that is we need to make sure that we're not just thinking about ourselves, but we're thinking about from the seat that they sit in. All right? Once again, it gets back to perception. Are you all familiar with the personal and or educational backgrounds of your parents, your board members, your faculty, your admin team, or staff? You need to be, because can you not imagine that if you understand, for example, how many of your parents attended private or independent or parochial school? If you know that, you'll understand better their understanding of how private or independent or parochial schools operate, or this whole concept of annual funds. If you've attended a public school, you may not even know what the heck is this thing that I pay tuition and then I'm still being asked to contribute, right? Furthermore, we might say, well, they know about it because of college, but how many of your families, in fact, went to college? In addition, we also need to know that we need to have an understanding of our board members. Do our board members, in fact, come from either our institution, or do they, in fact, have a background educationally or otherwise? And finally, one area that oftentimes is overlooked is our own faculty and admin team and staff. And again, where I'm going with this is oftentimes we will hear, and maybe this doesn't happen in your school, but we'll hear faculty that, once again, will not necessarily understand the importance of what oftentimes is referred to as customer service. Why do I came here to teach. I'm not familiar with needing to return emails or voicemails or come to back to school night or whatever. By understanding individuals' personal backgrounds and experiences, it will help us tremendously in understanding how we might present some of the topics that are in front of us. Clarifying vision for people, again, is another way to use this as an example. When boards of directors talk about class size and school size, they are oftentimes, more so than not, thinking about dollars generated, revenues generated, again, thinking about it from the finance perspective. When faculty hear about class size, they tend to go immediately to how many people do I need to teach? Are they academically in the same profile? And so one phrase in the absence of clarity can mean very different things to very different people, and yet as a result they're going to respond differently. So clarifying the vision is also critically important. When you think strategically and you think about who's going to be doing what, when, and how in this strategic enrollment management, I'm gesturing to the wave that we saw in that earlier visual. And furthermore, when we think about the culture of ownership and who's doing what, when, and how in that strategic enrollment management, how many of you have heard about the phrase, begin with the end in mind? The beginning with the end in mind is before you even start your admission process from one year to the next, or, 18 months. Look at what are your strategies, as well as what are your priorities. And this is a great opportunity for you to turn to your head of school, turn to your board of directors, turn to your colleagues and say, as you think about next year, as you think about the future, what are your priorities? And then establish those priorities so that you can think about, okay, we want to work on having more feeder school enrollments. We'd like to have more enrollment in the area of stronger academic rigor. The football coach wants stronger players. We'd like racial and ethnic diversity. Getting those priorities set allows you to proactively then establish those, create the plan, and oh, by the way, assign who's going to help you with this, and then measure the success afterwards. Understanding your brand and value proposition is also key and critical. I want you to think for a second about who you are as a school and also think about what you are not. We oftentimes think about what we do, what we do, what we do, but we never necessarily think about we will not do something. And the we will not do something is absolutely critical at a time when you most likely will be faced with, is this student's profile really that weak? I'm wondering if a full payer and a nice mom and dad, but I know they need extra help in the classroom, or it's a behavioral issue, or. If you've established not only what you will do, you will also be required to establish what you won't do. And so then, when you are faced with that question, you can say, we won't do that. So that then, if someone then says, well, why are you under-enrolled? Or, why did you not take that child? You can say, in a discussion with our academic dean, or with our learning specialist, or with my business manager, right? You can see partnership, collaboration, and a culture of ownership. In establishing your brand and value proposition, now this is the class participation part of this, I want you to think about sample strategies that lead your school in your differentiating qualities. So this could potentially be a disaster, or it could be fun, but we're going to try it across the miles here. I want you to think about 3 words that you use, okay? 3 words or phrases that you use to talk about your school. And now I'd love to hear from some of you, or all of you. Somebody want to call out a word or phrase that you use to describe your school?
Academically rigorous.
Academically rigorous. Does anybody else in that room or on this call claim to be academically rigorous?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, guess what? Then it's not unique, and you have to cross it off. What's the next item or idea or notion? Academically rigorous, we talked about. What's another thing that you all talk about at your school?
I'm from a Catholic Montessori school.
Okay, so you may have it, but are there any other Catholic Montessori schools in this room? One could say maybe not Montessori, but maybe Catholic, or maybe not Catholic, but maybe Montessori. What does that then mean, right? So we'll do one more to try to make the point here. What's another word or phrase that you use to describe your school?
Intentionally inclusive.
Intentionally inclusive. So whereas you may not use that exact phrase, does anyone use phrases that might be similar to that? Intentionally exclusive. So,
Inclusive.
well, I'll just leave it at that. Anybody use any words or phrases similar to that? Because again, where I'm going with this is you have to stand out from the crowd, and you have to have it obviously attached to your mission, but in the absence of people being able to understand your value and proposition and your brand identity, what's going to happen is they're going to go to price. So as we foster a feeling of family, and we are global learners, and we are academically rigorous, and we are action oriented, and we are learning with a faith. What's this one from Deborah? Hold on. Learning with a faith foundation. I would say that many of our faith-based schools are saying that we're learning with a faith foundation. To the consumer, also known as family, we're not identifying ourselves in a more intentional way, in a more laser-focused way. And so some of the ways that you can differentiate yourself is by thinking about we are, and what does, for example, intentional inclusiveness mean? How do you describe that? And then how do you do it? So it's what is it? What does it look like? And where can you see that kind of work around the campus? Be a secret shopper. Now, again, what I mean by this is that you're only as good as the information that you have on hand. And oftentimes, the information that we have on hand is only about ourselves. So if you can be a secret shopper, and this is where the wonders of the Minnesota Independent School Forum can come into play, but as you all get to know each other and you know about processes and procedures and clarity and all these other nuances of your cross-application schools, you'll then know what in fact is working well and is not working well, and then how that sits with your own families. So again, for many of our schools, as an example, we talk about financial assistance and the distribution and the allocation of financial assistance as being an incredibly challenging process for people. And oftentimes the reason that it's challenging for people is not necessarily the forms that they have to fill out, although those are obviously very challenging at times, but it's when the distribution of funds are announced and a family is sitting there going, I filled out one form, or heck, I filled out 5, it doesn't matter, but the same information was shared, and yet I'm getting a different result, and I don't understand why. Their perception becomes that one school wants them more than another, when in actuality, it's most likely due to one school, for example, imputing a stay-at-home parent's income as $2,000, whereas another school said, well, a stay-at-home parent is 0, right? You can take policy and procedure and have the output look different from school to school, and yet we don't necessarily tell our families about those different nuances. And so by being either a secret shopper or understanding what's happening in the market in a way that doesn't feel as though you're giving away trade secrets, and by following ethical behavior and best practices, by looking at if it's merit aid, it's above and beyond, let's say, non-need based, and if it's an award or financial aid, that is need based, by having those kinds of examples be clarified for people, again, you can establish your brand and value proposition. And if you're sitting there going, I have no idea how to do that, maybe someone in your business office knows how to do that. So that would be examples of working with them side by side. Using your mission statement as the beacon and as the document that brings you back every single time is absolutely imperative. And by using your mission statement, I'm going to give you this example and we can go from there. Here are a couple of examples of mission statements from different schools that I saw on the list that Michelle sent me. So we have things like, to provide our students with a complete education that will lead to success in university and in life as contributors and leaders. Another one, to create a supportive learning community built on the values of trust, respect, and integrity. What does that mean? Show me what that means. Don't just tell them what that means, show them. One of the ways that you can do this, and this gets back to, I believe it was Valerie or Laura that was sharing with us about the plan that you all are creating. But where I'm going with this is to say, pull out a good old Excel spreadsheet and use phrases in your mission statement, and then ask your faculty, staff, and administration, and maybe even your board to help you fill this out. So if one of your sentences is, provide our students with a complete education that will lead to success in university, in life, as contributors and leaders, where do you do that? We do that in the 4th grade classroom, okay? When do you do that? On the 5th grade field trip. How do we do that? By making sure that everyone has to memorize a poem and stand up in front of the school and do a recitation. How do we know if we've been successful? Our alumni survey shows that feedback on students' impressions of their ability to be articulate and well-spoken in the business world began at Corn Cob, Academy when they had to do a poem. I'm just giving that as an example. Where, when, how, and how do you measure success? A great exercise for your faculty, a great opportunity for your faculty to contribute to what is the message and what are the methods that you do what you do. Here's some examples of some schools that have done it, that we've worked with. This one in particular is from a school in Australia. Again, even though I'm showing my screen, I know the printing is small, so you can see it later when we distribute the deck. But you can see that they are very clear about what their vision and their mission and then their core values are. And then to the right, they say, and this is how we implement it. This is what we do. Here's a Jewish day school in California. Their mission statement to promote academic excellence. Boom, a one sentence. And then they go in and they say, we do it through learning, community, respect, and the Torah. So using your mission statement helps you do what you do with purpose, clarity, and intention. And again, it helps to promote this idea notion of culture of ownership rather than administration versus faculty, us versus them. It also forces you and your school to be less focused about being school-centric and more focused about being customer-centric. It forces you to think more about what do they want and need rather than this is all we do. This is all we do and you better like it or not. By making sure that in fact you have thought about what are the problems that you seek to solve for the customer and understanding why families hire you, that intel will help to inform your market and your message that, again, your marketing communications department or individual or you can then work on. By understanding why families are coming to you, it could help shape what your academic curriculum and mapping would look like. By understanding what problems you solve for the customers, you also can better understand maybe some of their purchasing practices, right? A 10% discount in tuition at the time of enrollment, and then 70% at Christmas, and the remaining 20% before you re-enroll. How does that work for people, right? What is the problem that you're seeking to solve for the customer? Why do people come to you? That's critically important as you think about how you might shape that family's experience. How many of you can perhaps share with us what are the reasons why people are hiring you? Do you all know? And again, I'm asking for any feedback if you know why people are hiring you.
More attention.
So,
like smaller class sizes, giving them more student focus.
yep. And so if it's smaller class sizes and more student focused, what was the problem that you solved then?
That they were overlooked or overwhelmed before.
Perfect. Perfect. So if they're overworked and overwhelmed, then, I mean, you could really, again, this could be a day-long session and I would require that I'm there. But anyway, but if they're overworked and overwhelmed, then do you send out form letters? Or do you have parent-teacher conferences? Or does everybody know their name? I mean, do you see how you could really think about how you're meeting the family's needs, for example? If they're overworked, we're all overworked. If they're overlooked and overwhelmed, tell me about your admission process. Is it group tours or personal, right? Those are the kinds of opportunities that could lend itself towards the examination of all that we do and why we do what we do. When does your admission process begin? Do you all know? Your admission process begins at the first time that a family either clicks on your website or hears about it on the soccer sideline. It is not when we start open houses in October. And so if in fact it is in all of these sort of organic moments, then how are you informing families about the kinds of students that are good matches at the school? How are you distributing something like points of pride so that people can be armed with really great information? And furthermore, when you think about when families begin the re-enrollment process, the re-enrollment process does not begin when you issue them their next contract. The re-enrollment process begins the minute that that new student enrolls. So many of us find that we offer admission A family enrolls, and then we have, March, April, May, June, July, August, September until they come to our campus. What are you doing with those new students and families in that chunk of time? Are you engaging them? Is this a time where marketing communication could be specific to them? Are they invited to the school campus? Are they allowed to participate in events and activities? Is the academic dean or office working with them on course selection? Are you having parent gatherings? If you're not doing any of those things, that's a decision. But if you think about it from this idea and notion of what are other things and opportunities for people to be involved in your school community, the opportunity to examine this in this particular way engages those new families as well as engages other constituents who might feel like they've been forgotten. Many a new parent enrolls at a school, and that first year or 2 years is sort of like, I haven't found my niche. New families can be great to then help with other new families coming in. Again, an idea and suggestion for you as you recognize that people are thinking about sending their children to be repaired or prepared. Identifying which aspect or which bucket they fall into can really, really help you. You're anticipating their ideas and notions. You're thinking about the enjoyable experience, and you're understanding that, in fact, when you are customer-centric, it does allow you the opportunity to involve many others in this part of the process. So again, with ideas and suggestions here, you can see that your school needs to ask some of these questions and determine whether or not you're following roles and responsibilities and perceptions of things in such a way that, again, offer them opportunities to be much more involved, or are they just recipients of the information that you're sharing? What are some of the things that you all feel you do well that, once again, are very family-centric that have been successful for you? Anyone want to share in any of that?
Before and after school care for dual.
Great. Okay, so before and after school care for dual income parents. Okay. Are you a lower school or a middle or upper school? And I'm asking because have you had any pushback from, if it's lower school, pushback from some of the teachers who feel like, well, that's such a long day for little Johnny?
I know it's a K-12. I think it's a pretty community focused, so I think people understand different needs since we have all families transporting their own students. So yep. I think overall support of it. Good.
Anyone else pleased with something that they've either implemented or has been sort of a mainstay in the culture and climate of your school that you feel is spot on with recognizing that it meets the family's needs? Again, by identifying what are some of these opportunities, and by identifying what is the problem that you seek to solve for the customer, and by identifying who your target audience is, it then also reinforces or deters from the idea and notion of what we call mission creep. So when you are, as I've called it here, a recovering people pleaser, and you feel like you need to be all things to all people in efforts for you to either stabilize enrollment or keep enrollment, in actuality, you've watered down your enrollment, and you'll find that you're riding a very slippery slope. So not only, again, are we reinforcing this notion of what will you do, but also what won't you do. And by asking your faculty and your colleagues to participate in the identification of that target audience will also help you tremendously in how you market your school and you think about it. Pulling out the Excel spreadsheet. Again, I mentioned this in an earlier point when we talked about mission and clarifying this. But in efforts to develop this culture of ownership and having everyone understand that we need to be aware of all students and all things here is, again, the use of an Excel spreadsheet can come in quite handy. Listing everyone in good old column A, top to bottom in alpha order, all the students, and then going through each of those students and knowing what grade they're in and identifying a faculty contact. Now, it does not need to be the student's advisor or their homeroom teacher, but you need to identify, especially our colleague that talked about inclusion, right? Especially our colleague who talked about small class sizes and not being overlooked. By going through this exercise, which, by the way, is extremely arduous that first year because you're starting off fresh, but by writing down notes and who's in contact and having the grade, you will identify who are, in fact, overlooked. What student is, in fact, not someone that you have a contact with. But it also is a great way to then turn around to your faculty and say, here are the kids that we'd like to just follow up with you periodically and see how it's going. Calendars. A culture of ownership and calendars. I don't see the connection. Well, here you go. How many calendars could we possibly have at a school? Trust me, there are many. You'll have your admissions calendar that'll talk about the comings and goings and activities. You'll have your internal calendar that'll talk about critical dates. You'll have a financial aid calendar that'll talk about distribution, policy, procedure. And then we turn, let's say, to your business office and ask them to contribute to the calendar, and you'll find out when are bills mailed out, when are invoices expected to be paid, when are late payment notices issued. And then you ask your faculty, when are weekly notices going out? When are advisor notes happening? When are report cards issued? You add the athletic calendar. And if you're sitting there going, this is way too much, it is a lot. But by going through this layering process, you will suddenly see, no wonder my family, right? Again, we foster a feeling of family. So no wonder our families are saying, I have 3 children and I'm getting 3 emails for one announcement. Or on the day that you sent out my annual giving request, I got a notice from the business office about my payment for aftercare. And oh, by the way, the 8th graders are doing a community service campaign to save the orangutans. Money, 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 money. If you can sit down and look at all these things and begin to not necessarily get rid of things, although it would be helpful, but to begin to say, Mondays are annual giving days. Tuesdays are athletic days. During the month of February, I don't want anything sent out except for love notes related to retention. So again, I hope you're tracking with what I'm saying, because again, this is an example of organizational policy and procedure that allows everyone to have a say or a share in this, but it's managed in such a way that it helps to control or influence that customer's experience, that family's experience, that student experience through the life cycle of their work at the school. By looking at all of your calendars, again, the opportunity to look at all your mailings. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just that postal address mailing, but by seeing the messaging and the frequency and again, what the overall feel and flavor and purpose is of that mailing will once again allow you the opportunity to have clarity of brand. Again, I go back to do this in the context of your mission, do this in the context of the culture and the climate you seek to create, and having a connection between all of those things. An operational calendar. When is back to school night? Why do you have back to school night? Who's in charge of back to school night? What's the goal of back to school night? And were we successful? as an example, that's one of those opportunities for you to again imagine that you have some participation in and control in what might very well be the opportunity for you to not only manage the message, but manage it in such a way that it stays true to your mission. Let me take a quick pause here. Questions, thoughts, comments, reactions? Okay, I hope they're serving good like chocolate chip cookies for dessert or something, that you're getting up and walking around a little bit. Okay. And I hope you're still there. So, there you go. Okay. So again, as we collect data and we think about things, one of the hazards of all of this collection of material is when people look at surveys and feedback and look at it in the context of how everybody else is doing it. As you saw in these earlier slides of operational calendar, activity calendar, and looking at every student, none of this has anything to do with the outside. But as I talked about the importance of being that secret shopper, the collection of survey and information and benchmarking of this smacks a little of when people say, this is not how I do it, but I guess we have to do it because everybody else is doing it that way. So you really do, as an institution, have to, as a school, really need to find that wonderful balance between what works well for us and our community and having an awareness of what others do, but also making sure that if you do change, that it's in line with what works well at your school. I mentioned this earlier, but I want to reinforce the importance of customer service. It again gets back to, if you, for example, talk about we foster a feeling of family, or we value the importance of attention to your student, and yet your faculty don't return voicemails or emails, or at 3 o'clock they all hit the parking lot and exit. How does that feel? And does that resonate or conflict with, again, what your families are experiencing and what they expect? When you create systems, again, think about it from the standpoint of, does it meet our needs more specifically, or does it meet theirs? When we oftentimes hear people think about tuition setting, for example, boards and finance and admission professionals will set tuition and then say it only is increasing by 2%. Well, 2%, if you then find that you have more families than you have singles, is 2%, 2%, 2% by the number of children that you have. So do you, in fact, have an understanding of how many, not just students you have, but families that you have? When you think about school visits and open houses, we earlier heard from one of our colleagues say that they have an aftercare program that's quite strong because you have a lot of dual income families. Are your open houses in the middle of the day? Are your open houses in the evening, but you don't offer childcare? Are your open houses on the weekends, but then nobody can really see class in action? So again, I'm not giving you the answers of what you need to do. I'm just saying that this is where you need to think about what works well, not just for us, but more importantly, what works well for them. Again, there's some other examples here that I provide that you can see later on. But what we are, again, looking forward to and seeking to establish is relationships and trust and consistency, so that there's planning, there is planfulness, there is an accountability and measurement, there is trust that is developed not only on the part of the families that are coming to you, but on what you seek to be able to do for the families and how you can plan your work and role and responsibility. Because, again, we think about treating others the way they want to be treated. But in this culture of ownership, the culture of ownership develops it in such a way that we're all contributing to how our enrollment management process is going to happen, but it's not going to be done in isolation, so that, again, you have to be thinking about how they want to be treated. So with that said, teamwork has its rewards. And I end with this to say to you that this is a good example of teamwork because whereas I am sitting here with a control panel on one side, I know that my colleagues are with you right here talking about answering questions and facilitating more content. And we certainly know that we also have people who are on a webinar here. But I also want to, if of interest to you, again, continue to facilitate a conversation and answer any questions that you might have or thoughts or reactions to this, knowing, of course, that, again, I do apologize that the weather was not kind to me. So Michelle and Casey and others and Corey, again, questions, thoughts, I turn it back over to you guys.
Janice, I had one thought. We bring people together to network with their colleagues. And one of the things I'd like to do is take a few minutes to go around the room. And I'm going to ask you this ahead of time. We always wonder what you are taking away with you that you didn't think about before you came. Something that Janice said that maybe you hadn't thought of that perspective, or something that you saw that reaffirmed what you're doing in your school really well. So what I'd like to do, give me a minute. Can I start on this side and just say who you are and what school you're with, and give us a thought?
Sure, I'm Linda Olson from the Way of the Shepherd Catholic Montessori School in Blaine. Well, its longest title. For me, I'm a parent, first 13 years at the school. I've recently started in the enrollment area as one of my things, so this is a lot over my head, but the idea of the teamwork and the idea that enrollment does feel like we're not all on your team is an interesting thing to consider. We're a pretty small school, so a lot of our meetings, everybody is engaged in what can we do to, but I wonder, thinking about it, I'm like, how does that work? Like when we have an event, people do from faculty come and help, but so it's interesting to consider like how lonely or how to work on that, how to develop that more. So it's good.
Sure.
So I'm Rebecca Quick here at Bethany Academy, and there's a couple, it all actually kind of stuck out and just kind of affirmed what I'm doing. I'm in my third year, but I'm ready to kind of make some changes in how I do things to make it more my own and really communicate well about our school. The climate and culture really stuck out. We have a definite strong climate, and I see that our culture really is woven in, but that tying in with that operational calendar of just everybody is on board, knowing that everything we do really does have a purpose, but just taking that time then to articulate that and then communicate that vision so that people can all be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, as not that it necessarily needs a reason or a rationale behind it, but here goes. I think that with so many people feeling just overtaxed and burdened, whether it's perceived or real, when you can say, this is why we're doing this, and see its connection, and we're not just doing it because we're trying to just keep you busy, right? Then people will respect you more.
Right.
I'm Nancy Johnson from Bethany Academy as well, and I'm the head of school, so I'm not the admissions director. However, sitting through this has just really impacted me on how I can better even support our admissions department and what I can further in what I work with the staff. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. That's wonderful. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
I'm Linda Domino, and I'm from Legacy Christian Academy in Andover. And one of the things I actually sent a text message to our head of school during this, because with the photo of one of the slides, because he's been very intentional about helping the admissions department, and since then it's had a huge impact, not only on our enrollment, but on our retention and on how he's held the faculty accountable for having it be everybody's job and not just one person. Because when I first started, I was feeling that pressure. But one thing I really liked today was seeing about the calendar, about when people send different things home, because I think people stop reading things because they get too much, and then they say they don't know anything. So
I agree.
That's right.
Behind you there?
I'm Marnie McPherson. I'm the head of school at White Bear Montessori. We're very small, so I'm the head of school. I'm admissions, I'm marketing, I'm facilities. I'm financial aid award decisions. I'm color paint, are we gonna paint that? Did our pipes burst over Christmas break and I'm in Texas and oh my God, what do I do? My background, so I've been doing this for 7 years. Prior to that, I was in admissions director at a university level. So,
Oh, great. Yep.
This was all an amazing refresher for me because this is what I did.
Yep.
So extremely heartbreaking for me today to sit through here and realize how much I can't do anymore because I'm all those other things. And I know how to do all of those things. So right now I'm pretty frustrated with all of it and knowing how much better it could be.
Yeah, but I would beg the question, where was the school when you first started? I bet you it's further, I bet you it's not as far as it is today.
No, we've been plateaued for 10 years.
Okay, but again, by the way, this is called the pep talk, and we're pretending that there's not, 20 other people sitting around us. But I'm saying to you is that, no, maybe you aren't where you want to be, and maybe there aren't a lot of things that you can do, but you are doing a lot, right? And sometimes, believe it or not, by having these moments to reflect and by having these opportunities to examine not only the possibilities, it also reaffirms and establishes how far you have come and what you are doing, right?
Sure.
And thanks for sharing that. That's important.
My name is Doug Leeser. I work for Community of Saints Catholic School, and the conversation about retention starting from the very beginning struck me a bit because I feel like sometimes there can be a gap between they get a lot of attention until they enroll, and then there can be a gap before it starts, and the teacher gives them a lot of attention. So getting a concrete plan of what we can do between January and September to keep them engaged with the school and not let them fall off.
Right. And that gets back to what I was saying early on in our time together when I asked the question, are your families experiencing the same quality of care in the classroom, in the parking lot, in the whatever, right, that they did in the admission process? Because the minute they enroll, we have a tendency psychologically or literally of saying, here you go. And we hand them off, and yet, like, you don't know, like, what's happening. So those families that have enrolled were like, okay, fine. And if they call, trust me, I used to work in admissions. The family would call, and usually it was sort of the same old families all the time. And I'd be like, hey, we've got to go through graduation. I'm not thinking about new students. Well, they're raring to go. And could you engage them in such a way that you could say, we're so thrilled that you were enrolled. We look forward to having you join us. We wonder whether or not you would be interested in serving as an advocate or, an ambassador because we're still enrolling students. I mean, maybe they tell two friends and so on, right? Because you know that they're dying to put the bumper sticker on the car. They're dying to wear the new sweatshirt. They're dying to be celebrating the fact they're new to your school. And if we're not utilizing them in some way or engaging them in some way with somebody, we're missing a moment.
Janice, I want to say thank you so much. We're a little over time, and I know some people had to leave to get back to their schools. But we so appreciate you spending the time with us. We have to get you here in person, though, and we'll work on doing that in a fall or a
that'd be great.
Spring. I would love to do that. So thank you again, and we look forward to getting your materials, and we'll put that on our website.
Great. Thank you.
Bye now. Bye, Dad.
My older sister is certified.